By the seventh forged signature on the seventh fraudulent document, I realized my daughter hadn't just stolen my company. She had been planning my retirement into irrelevance for 7 months. The ink on those papers wasn't just black. It was the color of betrayal, carefully crafted in her elegant handwriting that mimicked mine so perfectly that even I had to look twice to see the microscopic differences. I am Thomas Mitchell. I am 64 years old. I spent 40 years building Mitchell & Associates, a structural engineering firm in Portland, Oregon. I designed bridges that could withstand earthquakes. I calculated load-bearing capacities for skyscrapers that kissed the clouds. I understood stress points, failure thresholds, and the exact moment when pressure turns solid steel into twisted wreckage. But I never calculated that my own daughter would be the earthquake that brought down everything I built. It was a Tuesday morning in September when I discovered the truth. The conference room on the 23rd floor of the building I had purchased with my own sweat smelled like expensive coffee and cheaper lies. I walked in expecting a routine quarterly review. Instead, I walked into an ambush. Jessica sat at the head of the table. My seat, the chair I had occupied for 4 decades. She was wearing a charcoal power suit that I had paid for with a bonus check 2 Christmases ago. Her husband, Marcus, sat to her right, looking like a shark in a Brooks Brothers tie. 7 board members I had personally recruited over the years sat along the sides, their eyes avoiding mine. "Dad," Jessica said, not standing up, not offering me a seat. "We need to talk about your role moving forward." I stood at the doorway, my briefcase in hand. Something was wrong. The air felt different. It felt like the moment before a building realizes its foundation has cracked. "My role?" I asked, walking toward the table. "I'm the founder. I'm the majority shareholder." "What role are we discussing?" Marcus cleared his throat. He was 36, a former investment banker who had married my daughter 3 years ago. I never trusted him. He had the kind of smile that calculated profit margins while shaking your hand. "Thomas," he said, sliding a manila folder across the polished mahogany. "According to the restructuring documents you signed over the past 7 months, you've transferred 65% of your shares to Jessica. As of this morning, you're a minority stakeholder." The room tilted. I grabbed the back of a chair to steady myself. "I signed no such documents," I said. Jessica opened her own folder. She pulled out 7 pages, each bearing my signature. Or rather, signatures that looked exactly like mine. "Board meeting minutes from February. You transferred 15%. Partnership restructuring in March. Another 10%. Estate planning documents in May. 20%. Operating agreement amendments in June, July, and August. 20% total. 7 documents. 7 signatures. 7 months of systematic theft." I picked up the February document. I studied the signature. It was perfect. The way I looped the T. The way I crossed the second "ent" in Mitchell with a slight upward flourish. She had practiced. She had traced. She had forged my name with the dedication of a master counterfeiter. "I never signed these," I said, my voice steady. "This is fraud." "Prove it," Marcus said, leaning back in his chair. "Every document was notarized by Linda Chen, your personal assistant for 15 years. Every transaction was witnessed by at least 2 board members. Every signature matches your documented style perfectly. Linda." I looked at the notary stamps. They were hers. I had trusted her with my calendar, my passwords, my life. She had been at my side since Jessica was in high school. "How much did you pay her?" I asked. Jessica had the audacity to smile. "Dad, you're being paranoid. You signed these. Maybe you forgot. You've been working so hard. The stress, your age, my age." She was playing the dementia card. She was setting up a narrative that the old man was losing his mind, forgetting what he signed, becoming a liability. "I'm 64, Jessica, not 94. "My mind is sharp." "Is it?" Marcus interjected. "Because Linda Chen documented 17 instances over the past 6 months where you forgot meetings, misplaced files, and had to be reminded of decisions you made. All documented, all time-stamped. They had built a paper trail. They had manufactured evidence of my supposed cognitive decline. Every missed lunch because I was working on a site. Every rescheduled meeting because of a client emergency. Every human moment of forgetfulness had been weaponized into proof that I was unfit. "Here's what's happening, Dad," Jessica said, her voice taking on a patronizing tone that made my blood run cold. "You're transitioning to an advisory role. You'll keep your office. You'll keep a salary, but operational control now rests with me and the executive board. We've already voted." It was unanimous. I looked at the 7 board members, men and women I had hired, mentored, promoted. Not one of them would meet my eyes. "You voted to remove me," I said. "We voted to protect the company," Jessica corrected, "from decisions made by someone who is clearly struggling with the demands of modern leadership." I wanted to rage. I wanted to flip the table. I wanted to scream that I had built this company from nothing, that I had mortgaged my house twice to make payroll, that I had missed her childhood because I was working 80-hour weeks to create the empire she was now stealing. But I didn't. I had learned long ago that the loudest voice in a structural failure is the one nobody hears. The real damage happens in silence, in the slow, invisible fractures that spread through the foundation, until one day, without warning, everything collapses. "I see," I said quietly. I closed the folder. "Is there anything else?" Jessica looked surprised. She had expected a fight. She had prepared for tears, for threats, for the messy emotional breakdown of a man losing his legacy. "That's it?" she asked. "What else is there to say?" I replied. "You've made your position clear. I'll review the documents with my attorney and respond accordingly." I walked out of that conference room with my head high and my heart shattered. I took the elevator down 23 floors. Each floor felt like a year of my life being erased. When I reached the parking garage, I sat in my truck for 20 minutes, staring at the concrete pillars I had personally inspected during construction. Then I pulled out my phone. I made 3 calls. The first was to James Coe, my attorney, a man who had handled every contract I had ever signed. "James," I said, "I need you to pull every document I've signed in the past year. Every single one. I need forensic document analysis, and I need it today." The second call was to Robert Chen, Linda's ex-husband and a forensic accountant who owed me a favor from a nasty divorce case where I had testified on his behalf. "Robert," I said, "I need you to audit Mitchell and Associates. Every transaction, every wire transfer, every expense report for the past 7 months. I'm looking for fraud." The third call was to the one person I knew would understand the depths of betrayal from family. "Sarah," I said, "my ex-wife, Jessica's mother. We had divorced 20 years ago, but we had remained cordial for our daughter's sake." "Thomas?" Her voice was cautious. "We rarely spoke. What's wrong?" "Our daughter just stole my company," I said, "and I think she's been planning it since the day Marcus proposed." There was a long silence on the other end. "I tried to warn you," Sarah finally said. 2 years ago at Thanksgiving, I told you she was asking too many questions about the business structure, about succession planning, about your estate." I remembered. I had dismissed it as a daughter taking interest in the family legacy. I had been proud. "I was a fool," I said. "No," Sarah replied. "You were a father who loved his child. That's not foolishness. That's tragedy." We talked for an hour. She told me things I hadn't wanted to see. How Jessica had always been calculating, even as a child. How she had manipulated her way through relationships, through college, through life. How Marcus wasn't just her husband but her mentor in the art of corporate theft. He had done the same thing to his own father's investment firm 5 years earlier. When I hung up, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to fight them in court. Litigation would take years. The legal fees would bleed the company dry. The publicity would destroy client confidence. By the time a judge ruled, there would be nothing left to rule over. No. I was going to use the one weapon they hadn't accounted for. I was going to use my knowledge. You see, Mitchell and Associates wasn't just a company. It was a network of relationships built over 40 years. Every major construction project in Portland went through our structural analysis. Every permit, every inspection, every safety certification. We were the gatekeepers of what could and couldn't be built in this city. And I knew every single project Jessica was currently managing. The first one was the Riverside Tower, 42 stories of luxury condos. Projected profit, $18 million. Jessica had pitched it as her signature project, the one that would prove she could lead the company into the future. I pulled the plans. I had reviewed them myself 6 months ago before my transition. The foundation design was aggressive, pushing the limits of the soil bearing capacity. It was legal, but barely. It required perfect execution and ongoing monitoring. I made a call to Martin Reeves at the City Planning Department. We had worked together for 30 years. "Martin," I said, "remember that favor I did for you on the courthouse renovation?" "Of course, Tom. You saved us $3 million in redesign costs. I need you to schedule a surprise inspection on the Riverside Tower foundation. Full structural review. Bring the state engineers." "When?" "Tomorrow." The inspection found 17 code violations. None of them were critical, but all of them required expensive remediation. The project was red-tagged. Construction halted. The investors panicked. Jessica had to refund $2 million in deposits. Project 2 was the Hawthorne Bridge retrofit, a historic renovation that required specialized engineering. Jessica had underbid the competition by 20% to win the contract. I knew she had cut corners on the material specification. I sent an anonymous tip to the State Historical Preservation Board. They audited the materials. They found that the steel grade was below specifications. The contract was canceled. The city sued Mitchell and Associates for breach. $3 million in penalties. Project 3 was the Pearl District mixed-use development. I didn't even have to sabotage it. I simply called the lead investor, a man named Chen who I had worked with for 20 years, and told him the truth about the forged signatures. He pulled his funding within 24 hours. One by one, I dismantled every project Jessica had launched. I didn't break any laws. I didn't lie. I simply used my relationships, my knowledge of every structural vulnerability in every design, and the trust I had built over 40 years. Within 3 months, Mitchell and Associates was hemorrhaging money. Clients were jumping ship. The board members who had voted me out were now calling me, begging me to come back and stabilize things. I let every call go to voicemail. Jessica tried to reach me too. First, it was professional emails. "Dad, we need to talk about the Riverside situation." Then it was personal texts. "Please, Dad. I made a mistake. We can fix this." Finally, it was desperate voicemails. "They're going to fire me." Marcus left. He said I was incompetent. "Dad, please. I'm your daughter." I listened to every message. I felt the pain in her voice. And I felt nothing. Because I had listened to the recordings Robert had pulled from Linda's computer. The recordings of Jessica and Marcus planning my retirement. The jokes about the old man who was too stubborn to step aside. The laughter about how easy it was to forge my signature. The forensic analysis came back. 7 signatures. All forgeries. The slight tremor in the downstroke that I didn't have. The ink that was applied in one continuous motion instead of the slight lift I made between letters. Linda had confessed everything to Robert, desperate to avoid jail time. She gave him the practice sheets Jessica had used. Hundreds of attempts to perfect my signature. I had everything I needed to send my daughter to prison for fraud. But I didn't go to the police. Instead, I called a special board meeting. I walked into that same conference room 6 months after they had voted me out. This time, I was carrying a briefcase that contained 7 years of corporate prison time for Jessica and Marcus. They were all there. The board, Jessica, even Marcus, who had filed for divorce 2 weeks earlier when he realized the ship was sinking. I sat down at the head of the table. My seat. "Gentlemen," I said, opening my briefcase. "And Jessica, I have some documents I'd like to discuss." I slid the forensic analysis across the table. I slid Linda's confession. I slid the recordings. I slid the proof of every forged signature. Jessica went pale. Marcus stood up like he was going to run. "Sit down, Marcus," I said. "Security has been instructed to detain anyone who leaves this room before I'm finished." I looked at my daughter. She was crying. Real tears this time. Not the calculated tears of manipulation, but the tears of someone watching their world collapse. You have two choices, Jessica, I said. Choice 1. I go to the district attorney. You and Marcus face multiple counts of fraud, forgery, and corporate theft. Linda has already accepted a plea deal. She'll testify against you. You're looking at 7 to 10 years in federal prison. Her hands were shaking. Choice 2. You sign a complete transfer of all shares back to me. You resign from the company effective immediately. You accept a lifetime ban from working in any engineering or construction-related field. And you publicly apologize to this board and every client for your incompetence. Dad, she whispered. Please. I'm not your dad right now, I said. I'm the man you tried to erase. Choose. She signed the papers. Her hand was shaking so badly she could barely hold the pen. Marcus refused to sign his portion, so I had him escorted out in handcuffs on an outstanding warrant Robert had discovered unpaid taxes from his previous company. The board voted unanimously to reinstate me as CEO. I rebuilt Mitchell & Associates over the next year. I fired 3 of the 7 board members who had voted against me. I promoted younger engineers who had stayed loyal. I won back the clients with the same meticulous attention to detail I had always used. Jessica left Portland. Last I heard, she was working as a realtor in Phoenix, using her maiden name, trying to outrun her reputation. I don't take her calls. I don't read her emails. She tried to show up at my house once, begging for forgiveness, but I had changed the locks and installed cameras. Sarah asked me once if I would ever forgive her. I told her the truth. I don't hate her. I don't love her. I don't feel anything at all. She's a stranger who stole from me, and I treated her like any other criminal. I'm 65 now. The company is thriving. I've set up a scholarship fund for engineering students from low-income families. I've mentored 3 young engineers who remind me of myself at their age, hungry, honest, and willing to work. I have a life. I have peace. I have the satisfaction of knowing that justice doesn't always come from a courtroom. Sometimes, justice comes from understanding the exact stress point where a person's greed becomes their structural failure. I counted 7 forged signatures, 7 months of betrayal, 7 decisions that destroyed the relationship between a father and daughter. But I only needed one decision to rebuild everything she tried to take. The decision to stop being a victim and start being an engineer again. Because engineers don't get emotional about collapsed structures. They analyze the failure, remove the damaged components, and build something stronger. I built a legacy twice. Once with love. Once with ruthless precision. The second one is still standing, and it will outlast every lie she ever told.